Andrew Campbell. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Uh, so my journey in actually the chocolate making world began more or less, you can say, when I started out teaching in Moburumo in 2010. Um, but before we get into that, let me just give you a brief background of cacao, or the English we would say cocoa, cultivation or growing in the Americas, especially Central, South Central, and even the Caribbean region. Uh, as you may know, the Mayan and the Aztecs would have made uh, cacao usage very popular um, in the 1500s or so. It was probably even it was used as even as a form of currency. But prior to that, um, cocoa really evolved in two parts of South America, the upper Amazon region and in the lower Orinoco region. And we would have had at that point in time what they would have considered two main varieties, the Forastero, which was found mostly in the upper Amazon, and the Criollo, which was found in the Orinoco region. Domestication of cacao was first recorded in Bolivia some 5,000 BP or before presence. That is 3,000 BCE. Um, and then the, it was not again until 3,000 years amongst the Olmecs, it was seen as a big part in the life of the indigenous people in Central America. So one can only imagine the extensive trade network that were there amongst the indigenous people 5,000 years ago. For it to move from the upper Amazon, the lower Orinoco region into Central America, it would not have taken a mere century or so, but it would have gradually um, reached to Central America trade. And that alone shows that the indigenous people's presence, especially in the Americas, was very widespread. So that is just a brief background of the origins of cocoa. The Mayan, they call it, it was named Theobroma. When you translate it, it means food of the gods. The Mayan use it as in their rituals and so. And in the Mayan society and even the Aztecs, only the upper class it was used by. So basically, it was a plant or a product that was highly valued in our ancient society. Um, when the Spanish took over, well, when the Spanish actually conquered these parts, they would have noticed cocoa being used by the indigenous peoples, and they they would have, just like the Mayan, they would have started to make their own cocoa tea and so. Um, really and truly, so we would have derived from two origins, the Criollo and the Forastero. The, the third variety, which is popular in Trinidad, the Trinitario, which is a hybrid of the Forastero, occurred due to the development of plantation economies. when the Spanish actually start to settle various parts of the Americas and the Caribbean islands, they would have established cocoa plantations. And cocoa cultivation in the Caribbean and even in Guyana date back to at least as early as the 1650s. In Guyana, the colony, they were cultivating cocoa as a commodity crop from around 1684. Um, in around 1720 or so, the the Trinitario would have developed naturally in Trinidad and Tobago after after the original variety, the Criollo, was wiped out by hurricane and diseases, and they brought the Forastero as a substitute. Well, more not as a substitute, but as a means to because the Forastero is more, there's a word, more resistant to pests and diseases. They find that crop in the 1700 a very, well, for commodity purposes or commercial purposes, very high yielding, and hence you can derive more profit from it. So in the 1700s, in Guyana, for instance, the Berbice colony alone, they were producing over 600,000 pounds of beans from, let's say, from 1750, this where we have some records from, to 17 up to 1762. On an annual basis, they were producing over 500,000 pounds of beans. Well, at that time, the trade would have attracted a high tax, and so to defy or to dodge the tax collectors, they would have declared less production, whether it be coffee, whether it be cocoa, indigo, which was the main commodity that they trade with the indigenous people. They would have declared less to avoid paying higher taxes. So we were on a conservative end when we say around 500, 600,000. I believe the Berbice colony were producing over 1 million pounds of beans annually. After the 1763 rebellion, um, it was not until 1768 you saw a return of cocoa from Berbice. Yeah, a return of cocoa from Berbice. And it lasted for another 10 years. By then, coffee became the major crop of the colonies. After coffee, cotton, and then every plantation transitioned to sugar cultivation. But in colonial time, in most of the islands in Trinidad, Trinidad were producing over 4 million pounds of beans in the early 1900s. And at that time, Guyana were probably producing less than 300,000 pounds of beans. And we saw a decline over the years. There have been various attempts to revive the industry. Um, in the Tumeri Journal, there's an article that deals specifically with cocoa cultivation, and it gives you a very precise breakdown of the variety, how to go about cultivating it. And so in the 1920s, they would have brought in the hybrids from Trinidad. In 1959, again, they would have do some cultivation as well. And I now see the government is trying with cocoa again. So the Guyana has a long history of cocoa as whether it being a commodity crop for the colonial planters, or whether it was a crop that the indigenous people use and consume themselves. Because when you go through the records, especially the ones written by Robert Stromberg, the travels, both Robert and Richards, they would have identified almost every aspect of activity that was happening in British Guyana at that time. And cocoa, Richard Stromberg would have mentioned that there is a variety that is naturally occurring in the Guyana colonies. Well, in the Guyana Shield, actually. And based on discussion with indigenous people from various parts of Guyana, for instance, in Isinero, cocoa got there through a West Indian who settled there in the 1950s. Um, in Apateri, I was told by numerous sources that there is a cocoa forest that is naturally occurring. And in discussion with persons from the area, they would have said that the Caribbean or the Caribs, they would have brought those beans down. And you know, when the cocoa bean, there's a pulp on top of it. And in most cases, we would suck off the pulp and cast the bean away. So there's a theory there that the Caribbean would have brought the cocoa to that area. From researchers, I would have gathered that cocoa can be found in the Kanuku Mountains. Um, in certain places in Madia, for instance, you have cocoa growing there as well. And that was due to islanders who settled in Madia, in that area, Campbelltown area. In the Barbies, there are still cocoa from the colonial era. There are cocoa in Northwest, and that is due to the revitalization project that would have started in the 1950s. And those cocoa trees are still existent from that point in time. So that is just a brief background of cocoa in, well, cultivation more so in Guyana. Uh, Anyone would like to ask any question or make an input?
And feel free to those of us in the room just to unmute and ask any questions you'd like.
May I speak?
Hello?
Hi. Hello?
Isaac, yes?
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, yes,
Right.
Vin.
Hi, Andrew. Hi, Andrew. You know, this is so amazing to hear how you're talking about this history of this thing that you're farming. This is really a special experience. So just to check in with you about something. So you're saying like in the Barbies, wherever some of those cocoa trees might have descended from the colony days that in those areas.
Yes.
Right. And okay, and so you say that there's this interesting thing about how so you got like in Barbies, but that would have been brought in by the colonists into Barbies, or that would have been developed into plantations. like based on what they saw in Guyana from before. I guess I was just trying to get like how did they know?
So my belief, because there's not much written about cocoa cultivation, I would have got information from reading through variant manuscript on, the most of the governor general, they would write about the activities that was happening in the colony, the economic activity, whether they were trading with the indigenous people with indigo or tobacco they cultivated on the farm. So they spoke about these things in general. But it was never mentioned whether they would have brought in the seeds into the Guyana colonies, whether it be Essequibo and Berbice, because Demerara was only opened up a century and a quarter later after Berbice and Essequibo, the Demerara was opened up. But I do know that based on the variety that I have seen occurring in isolated places, um, we may have a variety that is localized right here. It would have hybridized in isolation, and it would have developed locally. So my belief is that, so like any planter, you would want a crop that would not be susceptible to diseases and other ailments. So I, as a planter, would select a variety that would suit our environment and that would last longer. And it's the same process that would have been done, what, 300 years ago. But my belief is that the original variety that they would have planted is the Criollo. And they would have brought in the Forastero from Brazil. From Brazil, yes. And then we would have the Guyanan variety, which is naturally occurring in our parts as well. And you can tell too, because when you look at the variant colors of the cocoa that we have in Guyana, I'm sorry, I'm on my phone. If I was on my laptop, I would have shown you a photo of the variety of cocoa that we have. You would have like purple, a deep orange color, a deep yellow. You would have one with like a kind of a violet color. So you have variant coloration, and also I would have detected, if you notice on the backdrop behind me, there's this variety there. That is the Criollo. I found that in Mobromo. Less than 1% of this bean is grown, can be found on the world market. So it's a very, very rare variety.
And
Thanks.
the quality of the chocolate. Sorry, like all them give different qualities of chocolate, or I mean, how is the chocolate from
Pardon?
how is the chocolate from these different varieties now, like the Crayola, and so is there a connection, like the amount of chocolate you can get, or the taste
Yeah,
also?
you have, well, in West Africa, they grow mostly the commercial variety, which is the Forastero. And that is more bitter tasting than any other cocoa variety out there. But it's very high yielding. A Criollo would probably bear 40 to 60 pods per annum, whereas the Forastero would probably bear as much as 350 pods per annum. So the Criollo now, it has a lighter, milder taste, milder and more flavorful as well. And each variety, you can tell the different notes. And the flavor in chocolate also, sometimes you may taste a earthy taste to it. That is not due to the variety of the cocoa. It's just that in the fermentation process, you will have a mixture of dirt and so added in. And when they roast the bean and crack, and well, you separate the beans from the shell, you will have some dirt residue remain in it, and hence the earthy taste. Um, yeah.
Thanks.
Any more questions? Anybody at this point would like to add or comment? No? Okay, Andrew, back to you.
All right. So you know where present day Soesdijk is of the East Bank, Linden Soesdijk Highway. Well, Soesdijk was a cocoa plantation in the 1760s, to 1780s, and that was the plantation owned by the Governor General of Essequibo Demerara, Lawrence Storm Vance Gravesande. You can say that he is the one that is responsible for the Guyana that we have today. Most of his writing has been used in the arguments at the, the tribunal that awarded the Guyana that we have, especially with the collaboration, or I would not say a collaboration, but they would have numerous treaties signed with the indigenous people that basically to wage war against Spanish encroachment in the Guyana territories. So Soesdijk was a cocoa plantation, and when he wrote about the quality, he mentioned it being one of the best you've had, very high yielding. You know, he would have given a good appraisal of the cocoa found on on his plantation in Soesdijk. Um, I was there a few years ago. I think me and Gavin, we were driving up going to Mary, and I noticed a cocoa tree, and I got a little excited. I thought that this tree would have come from that era. But when I started reading more, um, piecing information on cocoa in Guyana, in the 1920s and 1950s, the present nursery, the Tamari plant nursery there, was the you can say the cocoa research center in Guyana, where they develop all the cocoa seedlings. They had variant station, but that was one of the main station. Um, in 1958, the record showed that they would have developed, I think, 53,000 seedlings that year for distribution. So yeah, my excited kind of got calm as I read later to them. Yeah.
And from observation, from history, from teaching, how did you move into, and I know, of course, that you also plant ginger. What was the shift? Was it a natural progression into cocoa?
Well, when I started out teaching, you see, with the government system, they don't pay you right away, right? So I got into the ginger, well, I can say hustle at that point in time, as a means to get some income to support myself during the period that the government wasn't paying. But in 2011, I had a visit from a friend from the US, Campbell. And in my friend backyard, there were cocoa trees, and he was like, Andrew, why you don't get into um, chocolate making as a cottage industry? Well, I didn't really think much about it because, I mean, 2011, I was a year out of university, deeply involved in archaeology and so. So I saw my focus more or less shifted to, wanted to, well, it's still there for the archaeology, but at that point in time, I was really and truly into the archaeology. Unfortunately, my one of my professors died the following year, so the opportunity that was there for me to pursue my studies in archaeology went through, but it will be back on stream soon. And yeah, every year I saw cocoa being wasted, and it was in 2017 I was doing this excavation at the Red House in Trinidad, and I met a Guyanese friend, Jerry Anthony, and he introduced me to, well, actually Lena, she would introduce me to Jerry Anthony and Jillian Goddard. And well, I didn't know that they were into chocolate making, but we would have shared some experiences, some knowledge, some information, and indigenous, presence in Trinidad and we became very good friends over the years. In 2018, I was invited, me, Gavin, we were invited to the New Fire Festival. And I took some of at the time I was just, no, in 2018, I started out experimenting with, dehydrating ginger because dealing with market vendors is, it's like dealing with those big businesses in Guyana who would put you for months at the end in time. Yeah. But yeah, in 2018, I got into processing the raw ginger into powder, experimenting with dehydrated fruits, watermelon, pineapple, mangoes, all the Guyanese fruits and spices, and so I would have tried over time experimentation. Uh, in 2019, yes, 2019, let me backtrack. 2018 was in Parma, 2017 I would have met Gavin after a presentation at the Murray House. In 2018, we were invited to the Rupununi Music and Arts Festival. And me, Nigel, and Nigel, Ransford, Hadi, those are the first time we would have met. We all volunteered to the Rupununi Music and Arts Festival. In 2019, me, Gavin, and his band, we went to, we were invited to the New Fire Festival by Jerry. And I took some of my products over the dehydrated watermelon, the ginger and so, and it was a nice experience. And Jillian invited me over to spend the weekend. Well, I didn't know that they were actually planning to convince me to get into chocolate making. So when I arrived, we went to Brasso Seco, which is in the northern range of Trinidad. And I met Carl Fitzgerald or Fitzpatrick. And he is this local tourist guide, chocolate maker. And when I started to discuss with Jillian, what they would have started, I think, was in 2015 or 2016, was an alliance of rural communities of Trinidad and Tobago, where you have cocoa or whatever is the main crop being processed and marketed by the Alliance of Rural, this NGO, at basically at no cost to the community. So basically what the community produce, they get, I think, 98% of the profit from that, and the other 2% goes to operational costs, you know, marketing and things like that. And we had variant chocolate samples. Carl showed me a bit on the fermentation, a bit on the drying, and we got back to Arima, where I spent the night by Jill's place, and we were discussing variant things relating to the earth, to our history, you know, the way how, you know, people function and so on. Then they got into the serious talk about me being involved in chocolate making. So for one, I'm not really a chocolate lover. The reason being is that most of the mass producers, the big companies, Nestle, well, on the Nestle brand is a whole set of companies fall under that, right? Mars, yeah. Their source of beans are derived from child labor. So since my university days, when I became aware of certain things, I stopped buying, you know, those Nestle brand and those top end chocolate brand or whatever the case. I basically stopped eating chocolate. Um, and then, well, I met Jill and they gave me samples throughout the night and talked me into it. And they said that I think at that time Marshall Man, the singer, he had a funding project going on for chocolate, and I think it was around 3,000 US dollars. But I did not get that. I started out with one concho um, and a juicer with beans, basically to experiment with. Like I said, I had no knowledge about chocolate making. I was just convinced to get into it, and I wholeheartedly take it up. When I got a concha, they said preheat the concha. So I was thinking, how do I preheat this concha now? And I put it on this tower, you know, and burn up the bottom. And I was like, oh my gosh. Anyway, I it didn't damage the concha bowl. Then I realized, you know, when they say preheat it, you know, you can let the machine, the stone grinder, actually heat up the equipment itself. The first time I made chocolate, it was in June 2019. The event was in April of 2019. When I got back home, the equipment came in. I sourced some beans from Posororo Blue Flames Women's Group. Um, wasn't the best beans to work with too. And I made my first batch of chocolate. The sugar that I bought, which was the Demerara Gold pack, wasn't refined properly. And it was at that point in time I realized that we were importing sugar and repackaging it in Guyana. So I had to go directly to the source, the guys, to purchase the refined sugar that they were exporting. Yeah, so there were a lot of challenges at first, you know, no knowledge about chocolate making. The first batch was terrible in my opinion. And I had a friend from Switzerland who visited. At the time I was living in Corrida Park and she and her family visited and she was like, Andrew, I would like to try your chocolate. So I gave her the worst and the one that I thought that was really, really good in my opinion. And she bought all of the worst chocolate that I had. And she basically said that this is better than what they would get in a chocolate factory in Switzerland, because in her street they have a few chocolate factories, you know. So she said the quality is way better. And I was thinking, this is not really good chocolate. And that was at my worst. And I used to over roast beans. Sometimes when I look at the beans, it's black, black, black. Um, and when you over roast beans, you will have this extremely bitter taste, and you will taste that over roast. So it took a while to perfect those skills. It took me at least a year and a half to get those skills right. Because in order for you to make chocolate, um, there's a lot of critical stages. Fermentation is the most important stage, and that takes roughly 6 days. If your bean is not properly fermented, you will get extremely bad taste in chocolate. Uh, Once the beans are properly fermented, the next important stage is roast. If you roast, if you over roast or under roast, you will, of course, get extremely bitter taste in chocolate. If you under roast, the natural acid in the bean will not get to evaporate, and therefore the natural fat will not activate. So roasting is critical. Conching is basically the easiest part. You just add well, before you get into conching, you have to separate the shell from the nibs. Years ago, they used to do it by hand, but now they have equipment that does it within minutes. I use a old school method still. I use a air dryer, and I would blow out all the shells and only the nibs would remain. Once you have your nibs, now you get into conching. And like I said, that's the easiest part, but you have to get good source of energy. Unfortunately, we don't have that in Guyana, so we got shut down whenever blackout is on. Because to make a good tasting chocolate, you need to conch between 36 to 72 hours. Right after conching, you basically get into tempering, and that takes 2 hours. But tempering is also important. Now, two things may happen if the chocolate is not tempered properly. One, you may have fat bloom, basically meaning that the cocoa fat has been activated, and you would see spots like mildew spots on the cocoa bar. If you see that in any chocolate, it's not bad chocolate, it's just that blooming occur. Or you may have sugar bloom, where the sugar crystallize and separate itself from the chocolate. In that case, now the chocolate will be very grainy and not very appealing, but it's still good chocolate. So once the chocolate is tempered properly, you would see a nice sheen, a nice smooth brown color. Um, and of course, when you break it, you will hear that crack, that ticks. That is when you know your chocolate is properly tempered. And then you go down to basically your packaging, your wrapping, your packaging. And in artisanal chocolate company now, we do basically in small batches. Hence, the quality is 100% better than the mass-produced chocolate. In fact, the mass-produced chocolate that Cadbury and Faro or whatever they would call themselves, it's not really chocolate you're consuming. you may get like 10% natural cocoa, and the remaining 90% is safflower oil, palm oil, lecithin, cocoa butter, sugar, you know. So they do a major mix down for you, and in the end, you get a chocolate bar that is not healthy. Um, Healthy chocolate do not taste extremely sweet. That's one thing. A healthy chocolate, you will have the natural flavor of the bean. When you take a piece of chocolate and put it on your tongue, allow it to melt, you would taste the natural flavor of the bean. And then after that, you will taste the natural bitterness of the bean. So cocoa is not sweet. Chocolate is not sweet. You get sweetness when you add tons of sugar into it and a whole host of additives.
Sounds very much again like a natural pause. If anyone would like to comment or ask a question of Andrew. Okay, maybe I'll kick the ball off. Andrew, you said at the moment you do small productions, small batches. And do you do also your own packaging and distribution, or do you work with, have you got a chain of outlets? Do you?
No, we do our own distributions. To date, the Oasis Cafe, they have been very supportive. They would take off bars from us. The Guyana shop, they would take off bars as well. Uh, they pay a few weeks later, but you know, it's not like dealing with those other major companies, those big companies who take months at a time to pay you. It can be very hard dealing as a small business person with big companies in Guyana. Bounty Farm will be taking off chocolates soon. Uh, this week I'll be submitting samples to them. I had submitted samples, but the labels, the barcode was not visible enough, so that was rectified. So they will be a distributor, you can say, of our chocolate. Masi, they have places order as well. Now that we're getting into the main cocoa harvesting season, we'll have a plentiful supply of beans. And thus I'll be able to make chocolate consistently. You see, the thing is, cocoa, while it may bear year round, it's still a seasonal crop. And the season usually lasts from October to around April of every year. And within that period from May to, let's say, September, you will get beans in very, very limited quantity. Now, for the time being, even though I'm cultivating my own cocoa, I'm still dependent on Blue Flames Women's Group. Since I got into chocolate making, they have been my main supplier of cocoa beans. At first, there was a lot of challenges. There are a lot of challenges in terms of the fermentation process. But over time, you know, through back and forth and discussion, I think they have gotten their fermentation process right. Also, the women's group, early in the year, I went down to mob room and I teach them how to make chocolate. So I'm not the sole manufacturer of chocolate in Guyana. Blue Flames, they're also manufacturing in small quantities as well. But they're doing, while I am doing mostly dark, dark line with flavor with ginger and turmeric. I use virgin coconut oil sometimes as a substitute. I would add a little chili powder, and so I would add fruits, depending. I like to experiment. Um, they are focusing mostly on the dark milk chocolate line with fruits and so. And there's another women's group. Um, there's this area, Bunbury Hill. You know, uh, they have a lot of cocoa tree, and most of the time they go to waste. So I did a training with them last year, actually around this time, yeah. And we focus on processing, processing whatever raw material is available during the season, whether it be mango, whether it be pepper, whether it be ginger, turmeric. I taught them how to ferment, how to dry cocoa beans, and so. Um, the thing is, there's this thing with businesses or persons who like to champion themselves as environmentalists in Guyana. I find that, like Blue Flames, for instance, they have been making cocoa sticks since around the early 2000s. And one of the first thing I told them that when I start to seek beans from them is that, I want you guys, you ladies, to move from just making cocoa sticks where you can get a pack for about of 200 grams for about 760 or so, to actually making a finished product, a chocolate bar, where that same that 200-gram can give you about 5 or 6 bars, and you get 5 times as much money. You're adding value. And I was so happy that I was able to do the training early in the year, and that they're actually making chocolate now. Um, I believe that companies, well, especially companies or cottage industries in indigenous communities can thrive.
Hmm.
However, um, there's this perception that indigenous community, they're poor. But when you go into those communities and you see the abundance of richness that can be found, they are not poor communities, but very wealthy communities. However, um, they just need the right guidance in how to tap into those resources that they have. Because of course, everybody come with their own idea of, exploitation and so. And and truly, I believe that once indigenous people can control their wealth, they can be independent, and they have been devising agroforestry systems for thousands of years, and um, they just need to utilize those knowledge to add more benefit to what is there, and they can create their own employment. They just need to see the value in what they have. Um, that's just me, like I'm very observant of things. Well, I guess being a historian and so, and a person who like walk, I'm very observant of everything that is happening around me. And there's, oh gosh, there's so much potential, and they need to tap those potential, because you'll find over time that the foreigners will come, see that potential, tap into it, and indigenous people, or not even indigenous people, Guyanese, get a mere percentage of what is due to them. I I don't see that as a way how community should build in Guyana. You know, um, this is just my view on certain things, especially the resources in indigenous communities. We have to build the capacity, and we have to advertise them properly, and we definitely wouldn't have any problem, because there's a trend that is ongoing with, especially with indigenous branded products, can get a lot of support. But like I said, persons can basically use their resources to develop themselves.
Colleagues, any comments or questions or sharing an idea or a thought?
I saw someone sent a
Yeah.
move.
Yeah, I sent a message to the general chat. I'm just wondering, it sounds like it's a very complicated process of making a chocolate, when a lot of things can go wrong and you need to do a lot of trial and error before you reach and know. It probably takes a few years to improve the process.
Yeah.
But do people make it at home, like in home kitchens? Like they make jams and pickles from the garden. Is this something that Guyanese people do at home?
Yeah, you can do it at home, providing you have a concha or a juicer that you can grind the nibs into a very fine particle to a certain micron level, But it can be done at home. Look, it's not a hard process. It's just that the process is tedious. It takes time. Like last night, I spent 7 hours winnowing chocolate, cocoa beans, separating shell from the nibs. I basically stand for 7 hours doing that, So it can be very tedious and time consuming at times, but it's not labor intensive. It's just that, it takes up time. And it's an easy process, really, once you master. And from talking to other chocolatiers who have 15, 20, 25 years experience, every day is still a learning process, and every chocolatier have a unique way of knowing the quality of their cocoa beans. For me, I can tell when if the beans is not fermented or not. And once it's not fermented, I do not work with it strictly, because I know I'll get bad taste in chocolate, and you don't want that. So those are some of the experiences you gain over time. Like when I first started out, they used to dump bad beans on me, hundreds of pounds at a time, and it used to worry me. But after a time, I realized, you know what, you really have to do your research, especially if you have no knowledge in that arena. And my method over the years have been trials first, and then read about it later. Um, it worked for me. It worked for me because whatever errors I made, when I read about it, it clicked right away. You know what? You can improve upon those areas, and it helped a lot. Um, Basically, working out your kinks, and then you must have a good sense of taste as well. Um, your taste is critical. I rarely taste my chocolate when I make them, due to the fact that when I roast the bean, when I smell it, you have that lovely chocolatey sweet aroma. Now, when you crack the bean, you will have like a nice brown color. It's oily. And then when you start conching, now after you drop a few cups of nibs into the concha, you start to realize that within minutes, the nib turning into paste, right away. From my experience, I know that there's no need for me to taste that once I add the other ingredients to it. Now, I would check the quality 3 months later. If I'm going to the shop, I would take out a bar that I set aside, and this when I would know whether I make bad chocolate or good tasting chocolate. But luckily, I've been making good chocolate.
Are there any more comments, questions to Andrew? Well, Andrew, again, I am just, first of all, I'd like to thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction you gave to the whole arrival, so to speak, of coffee in Guyana, and to your personal journey about making chocolate in Guyana. You mentioned that you still get your cocoa pods from the ladies group, but earlier on you said the quality that you got at the very first wasn't very good when you just started off. Are they producing a better quality of cocoa now?
Yes, I would have complained, I would have talked and so. And the quality, like earlier today, I sent a message to Miss Christine. I said the quality is very good and I really like it. And I told her too that you will have very good taste in chocolate from this batch of beans fermented. And people believe information should not be shared. But I'm a historian, I have to share information, I mean, you don't share all of it, you share some. And I like to see people improve upon, especially because I've emphasized it over and over. If you're getting into chocolate making, your beans must be properly fermented. Otherwise you'll get bad taste in chocolate, and you don't want to make good chocolate 4 or 5 times and then you hit your clients with a bad tasting batch. It can, for any new business or venture, it can put a dent into your activities. So I've emphasized it to the women that fermentation is critical. Get it right, you wouldn't have any problem. Even though not only with me, let's say someone else buy beans from them, they would not have any issue. Currently, we are working on the standard draft of cocoa, quality of cocoa in beans in Guyana. So once we finalize this draft, it will be, the main, what you would say, the main thing that governs how cocoa bean is processed and so. To ensure that we have quality and standard. Because let's say we do reach a stage that we have excess beans to ship to the European market, we must have established standards that is not only recognized locally but internationally as well. And it will bode well for our country as you can say, as a new player, an old player now getting back into the cocoa bean world again.
Okay, folks. Anyone else? Comments? questions? Well, Andrew, may I just say thank you very much. We look forward, as you know, the festival is keen to develop a cocoa tree planting program in Region 9, and we are looking for partners and supporters. I think very much as you say, when you start anything, including your cocoa making journey, there are always challenges. But I think the question that Irina was asking is kind of very poignant for small cottage industry and small communities out in the hinterland in Guyana to know that with support and advice and training from folks like you, they can develop cottage industries that are sustainable and create alternative and viable employment in some of these hinterland communities. It is something I haven't asked you because I wanted other folks to ask, and so, but as a solo producer, and so have you had, you say you're currently contributing to policy that would impact the quality of production and type of cocoa in Guyana. Have you ever had any support from interest by financial support from the government so that you can convert what you're doing? Or do you wish not to be a part of that macro economy?
Well, the government wanted to hire me recently, but it was not favorable for me. Every information that I divulged would have divulged to them would have basically become their information and their intellectual property, right? Without me gaining any recognition. This is the sad part about it. So I refuse to take up the offer. But I still would go into Nari whenever they call me, and I would give them inputs and so on, cocoa. In terms of financial support, I would receive a few US $100 here and there, because when I got into chocolate making, I saw the need to cultivate cocoa, not only for myself, but well, I actually saw it as an industry where Guyanese can have exclusive control over. And especially the low income person in low income bracket in Guyana. Because cocoa can create generational wealth, right? It's not a short-term crop for one. They live for hundreds of years. Well, not hundreds of years, but for at least 100 years. They can produce for 6 to 5 years, but I would have put a cap of 30 years production lifespan. And that is sufficient to create wealth for one generation that can be transferred to another. I would have sent in proposal to a few NGOs, but never got a response from them. So basically, you can say at least 70% of what I put into developing cocoa seedlings would come directly from, whatever little earnings I would get here and there. Because I see it as part of my livelihood as well. I've been cultivating cocoa I planted, you can say, on not my land, but a friend land a year ago. But I have been encouraging and developing seedlings free of cost or at reduced cost to farmers since 2020. Would have developed, I would have gotten assistance from Van der Radzik in 2021 to develop cocoa seedlings. And those were developed and distributed to farmers. I think it amounted to 1,200 seedlings. So farmers would have got them in varying parts of Guyana. In Westdam, St. Cuthbert Mission, where we are farming, they have other farms. I have encouraged them to cultivate as well. And one of the things that I am thinking about presently, and it has been, you know, gathering thoughts on this. Like, I grew up in Sophia. Sophia is a stigmatized and depressed community, and the people have, of course, their house, and most of them haven't really concrete their yard as yet. And in my estimation, each yard can hold a minimum of 6 to 8 trees, and that can actually help them to offset some costs, electricity, water costs on a yearly basis. So I plan to go into the community. Well, I grew up there, and I would have walked the community each and every corner. Everybody knows me, all the Rasta men and so on every corner. So I will have a discussion with persons there, and once they're willing to grow the cocoa, and they can take care of it, and I will buy the beans from them, and they can, get a steady income, not a large income, but kind of offset some costs on an annual basis. Because let's say if you have 10 trees, each bearing 10 pounds, that's 100 pounds. That's 80,000 annually from your tree. If over 30 years, 8 trees, 24, you can earn some money.
Okay. Well, on that at least hopeful and economical note, Andrew, thanks again, once again, on behalf of the small group that joined us today. On Wednesday of this week, again at 4 p.m., we are hoping that we will have Tushar Khan talking about cotton, the plantation of cotton, and cotton as a sustainable domestic activity in some regions. Of course, all of these intense labor and so, but at least going back to cottage industries can and do make an impact.
The thing is, they have to do a lot of intercropping. And this is where I find some communities are going wrong. They're becoming dependent solely on one crop, a monocrop ideation. Where in indigenous communities, they do agroforestry system where everything is grown like in a hybridized manner, in harmony. That way, you get a full benefit all year round. If you have a failure in one part, you can always draw back on the other.
And again, as you know, Andrew, the festival approach is to look at planting in communities in 2 or 3 specific areas. Plants as ornamentals, decorative. Plants as medicine, used by indigenous people for centuries, something we now are moving away from, but yet there's so many local trees that we can use. And plants as food. And as you know, we've been working with the University of Guyana on soil and the development of soil and things that can grow cashews out in Region 9, specifically cashews, coconut, breadfruit, of course, cocoa and various other things. So we are doing basic research and working with partners and NARI as well. It is about engaging communities to be diverse, not just in tree planting, but look at food security, look at water, look at some of the things that, not that we take for granted, but we keep looking to others and outside without realizing, as you say, not only the physical resources, but the monetary, physical, mental, intellectual resources we have in communities across Guyana. And as a festival, we're looking at arts, to use the arts to help create awareness, to provide employment, to paint and draw and write and compose music and dance about the environment in which people live and how it's being destroyed by climate change, and how rarely we can harness the resources we have in those communities, working with partners as equals, not as commercial enterprise, as working as equals to share knowledge, to improve and add value to what is being done. So again, thank you very, very much. For your contribution. Thank you very much. Oh, I've just noticed that the chairman of Region 9, Brian Alicock, has just joined us. Brian, so let me just say before, we were just about to sign off, but I would like to say welcome and thank you so much for joining. You missed a very... You're on mute, Brian. Can you unmute your volume? Okay, so while Brian was there, and of course he's the chair of the regional council in Region 9, where the festival wants to have a base and wants to have a permanent presence, working with communities, for communities, to support other local communities. Chairman, can you hear us? Okay, I'm afraid we'll miss Brian on this occasion. But once again, to you all, thanks very much. And I know it's bedtime in many cities where you have joined us from. So have a pleasant evening. Thank you once again so much, Andrew. And we'll be in touch again about some other work we'd like to develop with you and colleagues in Region 9.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thank you all.